Thank you, Troy, and welcome everyone to the first of a four-part webinar series we have on behalf of Global Vic. So this is for cybersecurity in the US. So an introduction to the US market. So some of you may be on here, may have had some entree into the market before, and some of you it may be quite fresh and new. But what we'll be covering in this series is what the market's looking like now and what's working today. So we've got a fantastic panel joining me on the first one from our very own market here in Victoria. We have the CISO of Victoria, Dovid Clarke, who is the Executive Director of Data and Digital Resilience. Now, joining us from over in the other part of the world, where it's a bit later on a Wednesday, we have Brian Draves. And we have Scott Lundgren, and they're from 1011 Ventures, so the COO and the CTO from 1011 Ventures. And also we are very, very privileged to be joined by Gibbs and Kristopher Kleiner, who are from Cooley. So that's the cyber data and privacy part and special counsel at Cooley. So the sessions are being recorded, so you can place any questions that you have actually into the box there, and we'll go through those and try and get those questions to the all the participants as we can. So Dovid will do the first part. It's pretty much a hard stop at 9:15. And during each session, if you do have any questions, please pop them in the box. And if we get time, we will actually go through and have a look at them. So it's a pretty jam-packed session. It's pretty tight. So if you do have questions and think of them, as soon as you have them, pop them straight in there and we'll try to get to them where we can. Now, Daniel Halpin is someone that I've had a lot to do with when going over to the US. He's a champion over there for Victorian businesses, currently based in cold DC. We're having a chat where on one side of the world where we're nice and hot and 100 degrees over there, and here and there in negative sort of degrees over there in the Fahrenheit sense. So Daniel will just give us a bit of a run over from that side, and then we'll jump straight into Dovid. So Daniel, over to you, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, and hello everyone from snowy Washington, DC. Firstly, as we were calling in from different places, I just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands we're working on and pay my respects to elders past and present. Thank you to everyone for joining us for this first session of this webinar series focused on the US cybersecurity landscape. And thanks to Jason for moderating and all of our speakers for supporting the initiative. For those of you that don't know me, I am Global Victoria's Trade Manager for Technology in the US. And in that role, I lead our support for Victorian technology companies as they enter and grow their businesses in the market. This webinar series is part of a wider cybersecurity initiative for the US that Global Victoria is delivering in the first half of 2025. Our hope with this initiative is to provide more flexible in-market support for cybersecurity companies than can be provided by a traditional trade mission. And as such, among other things, we'll be providing support to companies attending various trade shows in the US, supporting Austrade's RSA trade mission in late April, and developing a market entry document to help cybersecurity companies understand what they need to do to successfully do business here in the US market. So this webinar series will consist of 4 sessions over the course of the next couple of months. Each session will focus on a theme or issue relevant to Victorian cybersecurity companies in the US market, including a session on engaging with the defence industry, a session with corporate cybersecurity professionals, and a final session on key cybersecurity clusters. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for each of those sessions. But firstly, today, as Jason has outlined, we're going to have some great discussions on some key stone issues for companies in the US market. So with that, I'll throw it back to Jason to get on with those discussions. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Daniel. Well done, mate. And yeah, straight away, I want to jump straight over to Dovid. So this discussion, we're looking at it from the CISO's point of view here in Victoria and looking back. So Dovid's had a lot of experience, not just working with government here, but also overseas. So he'll be giving us some great insights on how Victorian businesses can actually get a foothold over there in the US. So I'll hand over to Dovid, and the floor is yours, mate.
Morning, everyone. Thank you for your time. I need to talk to that photographer about the airbrushing because I do not look like that in person. But look, in Victoria, we've had a cyber strategy in place since 2021, focusing on 3 key pillars, and I'll focus on mission 3 if we can. But really, it's about the vision for a cyber safe Victoria across the safe and reliable delivery of government services, our cyber safe place to live, work, and learn, and a vibrant cyber economy relevant to today, of course. We really want to position Victoria as a global industry leader in cybersecurity, and that's obviously a joint whole of Victorian government approach. But it's about a combination of things: fostering a skilled workforce, innovating local sector and supporting that, and really enhancing cyber resilience across all industries. As you can imagine, it's quite an ambitious approach, and we're a few years in, and I think we were quite humbled and enthusiastic by the fact that the federal cyber strategy to 2030 has similar alignment and similar themes, and we can really get behind that as well. If we talk briefly about Mission 3, which is a key one for us here, is some of the successes to date, and we certainly, the work is not yet done, is we've been able to put a real focus on the people within Victoria, particularly getting on board with some of these great organisations out there, like the Australian Women in Security network. So we've been able to support over 100 people through the Victorian Women in Security program in cyber leadership and technical roles, just making sure they get ahead and knowing and understanding that the cyber industry is better with the diverse range of people, thoughts, backgrounds, and experiences. That's what makes us all stronger. We were recently, in partnership with DJ Sir, able to secure CyberCon in Melbourne for another couple of years till 2026. And for those of you who did attend this year, would have seen it was a fantastic result. 5,600 attendees we anticipated were there late last year as well as a great emphasis on small to medium business through our Small Business Victoria and providing expertise and funding for that as well. Possibly my proudest stuff is around our interns too. As you may know, within Victoria, TAFE Victoria has funded a certificate in cybersecurity. We take a number of interns out of there into a government role for 6 months where we fund them, and then we try to seek employment for them further from there. We're in second year. First year we had 5. 4 of those 5 sought employment within Victorian public sector and were all successful. The 5th decided to go back and do some more study on coding. And this year we've been able to take on 7. I suppose what struck me is just the quality of people coming through. We had over 700 applicants both years, but also providing a pathway that is more vocational and less focused on that postgrad or undergrad qualification. So we can get people into the industry quicker. We can upskill them and make them more valuable and bring them through into the industry at a more junior level. Another key area that hopefully some of you saw was working in collaboration with Service Victoria, particularly with the app. We've released a couple of tools. Password strength tester. We had over 60,000 people who have a play with that, and a cybersecurity self-assessment check. Unfortunately, I didn't get 100% out of that, and my big boss got better than I did. So that's been slightly embarrassing for me. We've also got a cyber safety focused website on the vic.gov.au platform. So I encourage you to have a look at that and push anyone towards that as well. I suppose a key one I did want to touch on, and Jason's probably going to ask me that question, I'll leap into it if that's okay, mate, is what are the differences we see between the Australian and the US cybersecurity industries? And we can't downplay that there are significant differences. Just look at the population. What are we talking? 380 plus million, and we're at 24. And there is a maturity and there is layers. And you see why Global Vic, InvestVic, and other organisations of the big government are putting a real emphasis on this. Is the market is highly competitive, but we also see a great opportunity for smart people and smart Victorian business getting in there. The diversity of customer base is a great opportunity as well. You would have seen the investment in defence, critical infrastructure, finance. 27, thank you, Lucy, apologies. I'm obviously, in my defence, I am Tasmania, a little bit slower than everyone else. And also the tech sectors. And I think what I've certainly seen, and the success stories we know coming out of Australia that have funding out of the States, is an ease of access to funding, an easier access to funding, particularly through venture capital and private sector investment. We recognise in Australia it has been a little harder, hence the emphasis here, but the ongoing support from state and federal government about startups, grants, accelerator programs, etc. And we would hope having a close-knit industry, cyber industry, means you get the feedback you need when you want to succeed. I think we can't downplay, though, the regulatory and compliance environment. It is a different one. We obviously have, through ASD and Home Affairs, focus on Essential 8, ISM, and other things like that, whereas a lot more mature compliance there. If you just look at CIS, NIST, FedRAMP as a minimum, compared to IRAP, and certainly let's not downplay the potential challenges around data sovereignty. We're seeing a greater focus from organisations on both sides of the ocean on that as well. I think we see that there is a high demand for cutting edge solutions in the US. You've certainly seen a lot more appetite about starting and failing fast in that. More recently, we were talking about a wrapper around Gen AI to prevent poison pill, things like that. So the ability to move quickly to respond to these emerging technology threats is really important. And the US market has the ability to respond to that. I think we've seen a number of successes in Australia through the incubators, a little smaller and then building slower over time. But there is a growing awareness and investment in cybersecurity around mid-sized businesses, and we don't see that slowing down as well. We also see the channel market in Australia has done reasonably well, and there's been a number of recent buyouts that will become public soon from Australian channel and managed service businesses that have been quite successful and have got multiplications on their EBIT as they've gone for that. I think the other one is, let's not forget, the population base is also the talent base. The US military got into cyber a lot earlier than the Australian military, and we've seen the rise of great talent coming out of the US military. As an example, those of you who heard of Robert Lee and Dragos, ex-Air Force airman, now he's the CEO of one of the more public OT security companies in the world. So having that access to that pool has to be a benefit for any organisation, and certainly for our startups coming out of Australia. That said, I am seeing more and more, and in Victoria, some really smart people being talented, but we need to understand that our best talent is in those specialist areas and how we upskill them and keep them motivated and keep the pipeline coming through. Hence, we talked about things like interns and the recruitment, how important that is as well. Our experience with the networking, the business culture has been, whilst Australia is quite collaborative and supportive, and there's been a number of initiatives over the last decade that I've been part of or be on the periphery of, and it's easier to connect. The pace and how important networking and things like RSA and Black Hat for you to get seen and be able to actually make a mark and stand out from the rest of the crowd. And I know that Daniel and the team will talk about that in some detail later. Do you want me to keep going, Jason?
No, mate, you could. I know you've got a hard stop in sort of probably sort of 60 seconds or so. So I just think, just to wrap up on that, because the strategy came out in 2021, September 21, and part of that, and what I did like about that strategy and that you focus on is this sovereign capability, or creating especially Victorian businesses. So I think for the people on the call today, what is the key piece of advice you'd give to Victorian businesses in particular, considering expanding to the US market? If you could sort of leave them with, 1 or 2 points, what would you sort of suggest is the best course of action for them?
I think those who've succeeded, and we have had a number of success stories out of Australia, and some that we use ourselves, is understanding your value prop, doing your research, and really getting that collaboration in the industry. I think what Australia's been good at, Victoria particularly, has been that openness of people willing to give feedback on what you're doing, give criticism as necessary, but encouragement through formal and informal measures. So therefore, the hard questions you've had sorted before you try and go into that bigger and slightly scarier market out there. I think that's the key one, because those value prop and those solutions that have really nailed it have done the hard work up front and now are really blossoming.
100%, mate. Couldn't have said it better myself. That's fantastic. And I know you got to leave us, but I really appreciate you making the time for us today. And you can find Dovid on LinkedIn or other parts. And I'm sure if you can, or you get the time, he's a busy man, but he's always happy to help out. So we appreciate you jumping on today, mate, and giving us your advice. And good luck with the rest of the day. And hopefully, we can get some success stories over to RSA. Appreciate it, mate. Yeah, thank you so much.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you all for your time.
Thanks, mate. Cheers. So now we'll flick over to the next part. I think raising capital is something that comes up all the time, right? So we can talk about going over to the US or to other markets in the world, and Dovid touched on, and that population difference is quite marked, right? We're into the 300+ million people over in the US, and we're 27 million, of which probably only 6.5 million or maybe 7 million in Victoria, if we sort of break that number down. But the raising capital thing is something which is quite foreign and something which is usually probably not looked at as professionally here as it is in the US. It's quite a different proposition when you're actually pitching to VC. So we are privileged here to have the caliber of people that we have on from 1011. Both Brian and Scott are phenomenal. To get access and to get information from these guys is worth its weight in gold. So with this discussion here, we want to basically just get in and find out, why and how you choose, like in the cyber industry, to pick where you're going to go. Like, because America's a big market too. So, you know, one of the points that we often talk about is where you're going to land. It's a big beachhead to land in America. And I know that sometimes your product market fit might fit on the East Coast, and sometimes it might be in the West Coast, and sometimes it might be down somewhere in Texas. But you need to know where your product market fit's going to be, and how you pitch that. Dovid touched on how do you actually pitch into the market. So I'm going to hand over to Brian and Scott now, who will give us a bit of a background on, you know, how do you find, you know, how do they find companies they want to invest in? What are they looking at the moment, and what's the market looking like going forward? So hand over to Brian and Scott.
Great. Thanks for that very flattering introduction. Appreciate it's good to spend some time
worth it, mate.
here. So just a quick sort of who we are in case folks don't know. We're somewhat relatively new in terms of a venture fund. So founded in 2014, kind of the first cyber dedicated fund. We're stage agnostic. We invest globally, as you can see sort of from this chart. What that really means is kind of five eyes is really where we concentrate. But we first fund of 2014 was 100. Then the second fund about 4 years later was 350, and then the fund that we're currently investing out of is 600. So just about $1 billion under management. Done about 55 investments. About 20 of those have exited. So we're actively sort of managing 35 companies at the moment. In Australia, we've got 2. So our first investment was Casada, which is bot mitigation, and our second was 5CAS, which is in the OSINT market. So we sort of found our way into the Australian market through partners, which is somewhat similar to how we've expanded outside the US in general. So we established a strong connection with the InQtel team, which opened a branch there in Australia maybe 5-6 years ago. And then also with a couple of the other local investors, especially the earlier stage side. So Maiden Sequence Ventures is someone we've gotten to know very well as your former Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull. He's become a formal advisor for 1011. So we kind of leverage those relationships as almost an extension of our team as we kind of look to deploy more capital in Australia. So that's a little bit about our background. The reason we started a cyber dedicated fund, it sort of fits a couple of unique things. Sort of one, it's very much for those, I think everybody on the call will understand this. It's very much an insider's game with its own language. Even the global sort of network, actually, when you get down to it, is relatively small in terms of people that really know what they're doing. So it lends itself to sort of being an insider game. I was with one of the co-founders of 1011 at some of the old school cyber companies, the PGPs of the world. Scott, who's with me today, who's our newest partner, is a lot more modern. He's sort of taking us out of the dinosaur age. But all of us kind of have that background, having worked as operators inside of cyber companies for decades, if not multiple decades. So that was one, is that it's sort of this closed system that's kind of hard to break into if you don't know the players. And then two, it has this very attractive thing for venture capital, which is quick adoption, quick replacement cycles, a lot of M&A. So it's one thing if you have sort of an old, not super modern HRIS system or an accounting system, the people might scream, but you're not going to end up on the front of the Wall Street Journal because you've had a breach. You better have the latest and greatest when it comes to cybersecurity. So you see adoption cycles much more aggressive than in the typical sort of software, even general IT product offerings, which leads to, many early stage companies getting traction quickly. It leads to numerous acquisitions. So it's a very attractive sector in terms of just the general venture capital model. So you combine those two things of an insider perspective that we felt was needed, together with this sort of rapid adoption and lots of potential exits, and you've got a pretty great space for the vent to plant a flag for cyber investing, and it's worked out for us quite well.
Yeah, and Brian, how do you find companies? Because you mentioned Casada, and I remember going actually with Sam Crowther on one of the early RSA missions. I think it was back in 2018.
Yeah.
And I remember Malcolm Turnbull, who people would know on the call here, as a former Prime Minister, being an investor there.
Yep.
But how do you find, I think the people on the call will be interested, how do you find companies, and what are you looking for in companies, whether you choose to invest in them or not? So how do you do that part? I think that'd be something that we'd be really interested to hear from you about on this side of the world.
Yeah. Well, Sam's, I think Sam's a known quantity outside of Australia. He's was quite well known from an early age. Plus, he's got
Yep.
those great Charlie Brown sweaters that we just really love. If you've spent time with him,
Yeah, he does.
it's hard not to sort of fall in love with what he's built. But that was it was all relationships. So we had known Malcolm a little bit. He had recommended that we take a look at them. The InQtel team was also in Casada as well.
Yep.
Those are folks that we'd known. That one of the first folks involved there was actually originally part of the U.S. team, so we knew her quite well. So it was kind of word of mouth, right, at the beginning. And that's, I think, typically how we find deals. That's about a third, right? Our advisor network, our extended sort of family that brings deals to us, right? Whether it's repeat founders, kind of, we have Scott heads up kind of our CISO network, which has some of the global CISOs that kind of whisper in his ear who they're seeing and recommendations. So that was one that came through us sort of with our extended internal network. About a third, that's about a third of our typical investments. About a third come from just targets. So Scott's kind of analyzing the sort of cybersecurity map of subsectors, which could be by some accounts as 52 subsectors, a couple hundred subsectors. The market map is a bit of a mess, but identifying areas which we think are ripe for disruption and going after companies, right? And that's how we have found companies like Twistlock out of Tel Aviv, right? That was we saw the rise of containers and knew that those were going to be a new attack vector, and we just sort of scoured conventions and et cetera and found Twistlock out of Tel Aviv. So that's about a third where we're actively targeting.
What I was going to say actually, and from an Australian context, and just probably be a little bit selfish, and say Victoria or Australia, more specifically, what are you looking for there? Because I think, what are some of the best practices you've seen from overseas companies that basically have been successful or broken into the US? Because, obviously in your own backyard, it's a little bit easier, it's probably a bit of a known quantity, but what are you looking for when, we've mentioned Casada, but looking forward and in today's and go forward position, what are you looking for now in companies to break into the US market? And probably second to that, what's the investment landscape looking like for cybersecurity companies at the moment, in your opinion?
Well, there's more. So we were the only cyber dedicated fund. There's now, I don't know, by some counts, 5 or 6, right? You're seeing, major commercial venture capital get into the cyber market. There is a lot more money than there's more money than there ever has been out looking for cybersecurity companies. So I'd say to that end, maybe it's easier because there seems to be more capital. That said, there's still way too many startups, right? There are way too many Me Too's, and it's very hard if you ever walk the floor of an RSA conference.
Yeah.
It's very hard to get any attention, right? With everybody seemingly screaming the same message. And so I think we were just talking about this, but proven traction it is always helpful, right? If there are proof points where you're solving a need, people are paying for it locally there in Australia, those have been our sweet spot, right? And same with the companies out of Tel Aviv or London. These are companies that they're onto something. We find them earlier maybe than most because of the extended network and because we're looking for them. And we have a bet that they will be able to replicate the success locally because they're really solving a true problem in the bigger market in the US, right? So we can help quite a bit with, you mentioned sort of which city to go to, right? Which events to do. Like a lot of the go-to-market stuff, we can scrub in and supplement the team and lend our expertise and really move the needle. But if you're not solving a problem and it's, you know, the team has major faults and the product has major faults, you know, that stuff can't be sort of papered over. So I think we're looking for a strong foundation on those fronts. And we think that we can leverage the fact that, you know, you're breaking into a new territory that you may not know a lot about, but we do, where we can really take you, where we can really accelerate your growth. Is that, Scott, would you add anything there?
Yeah, I was going to say, and to Scott, I was going to say, just to introduce Scott, sorry, because I know you guys are on a time limit as well, and we've got a couple of minutes, but Scott, just on that, also, what are some of the areas you're seeing have the most potential for growth in cyber in the coming years? I mean, we keep hearing the buzz about AI, right? But in the context of cyber, what are you seeing as the sort of potential growth areas, or where are CISOs, as an example, seeing where the biggest fixes are required in their networks and in their areas? What are you sort of seeing as the go-to places?
Yeah, the first, thanks for the time. It's great to be here. And then second, to answer your question, that's kind of piggybacking off of Brian's comment about the market map. That's a very long answer. So in the interest of time, I'll just pick three areas. So one area that's been hot for a couple of years and remains so, and there's every reason to believe it might be even larger over time, is around the general area of supply chain security. So the whole life cycle, from components upstream, from commercial vendors, from open source projects, et cetera, all the way down, and being able to articulate that very clearly to a CISO and to the security team. That's a complicated problem, and so that's an area that I think we continue to see a lot of traction on. The last 10 years, obviously, the big push in IT generally has been cloud delivery, and cloud everywhere. We're kind of getting to a point now where we're fully recognizing the consequences of that from a security perspective. So one sub area there is around data management, data privacy, data security of data that's in the cloud. So when the premise walls have been entirely broken, how do we make sure we understand where corporate and entity data is and what the controls are, and et cetera, et cetera. And then lastly, just because it's timely, I'm in Tampa, Florida right now at the, it's called S4 X25, but it's the OT, or Operational Technology Cybersecurity Conference. So operational technology is that tech distinct from IT to, automate production lines, inside ships, oil and gas, et cetera. So all that kind of real world physical control systems. That's a whole different environment. And so even though at the highest level, the taxonomy of an attack is similar, the specific requirements for a product are quite different. And so we see that as being another area of growth.
Excellent. And do you see, for security companies, what should they be doing to engage in those sorts of areas? Because you want the feedback. Obviously, if you're building a product, there's no use you thinking that being a good idea and going, we're just going to build that. It's
the most important thing. And Brian, I hit on that with, how can we tell as a venture firm, who is likely to succeed and not? A really important proof point is some level of commercial traction. And that can only come from relationships that you as the founders have to have. And so I can't emphasize that enough. We don't have the answers on our side in the entirety. If we did, we'd probably just go off and create another great,
that's right,
our company and be done. So I think it's really incumbent on everyone, particularly technical founders, and I put myself in that bucket. So someone who maybe naturally is a little more introverted, how do you right from the beginning make yourself in a tight relationship with 3 or 4 or 5 design partners, visiting them at their site, really understanding what they need, how they're using it, listening to their feedback. You can't do that with a Zoom, 12 months or 15 months in and think that's enough. And so really critical. And I wish, again, I had a magic shortcut for you, but in most cases, what I've seen working is just being willing to talk to people you've known from your industry experience.
Yeah, because it's. I mean, we're talking crystal ball stuff often with cybersecurity too, right? Is that the next big thing? We don't even know what that could be. You know, that's the thing. You touched on topics, but what is it in particular in between those things we've got to solve for?
That's
And
right.
that's the thing. And I think Brian touched on a lot of copycatting, and that is the problem. You do walk the floor at RSA, and if you haven't been before, it is just noise and movement, and you can have 72 same companies pretty much with different color banners, all trying to solve for the same thing. And how is someone standing above that? There's a lot of, we saw last year with obviously Fortinet and Lacework coming together, and we're sort of talking about a lot of things happening. There's a lot of consolidation in the market too. So if you are going to do something, you want to do something which is unique or specific. We talk about next gen all the time, inverted commas, but it does have to be something which is going to be absolutely ahead of the pack, or something which is going to be different and stand shoulders above. And I'm sure you agree, Scott, it doesn't matter whether you're from Australia or from the US or Israel or anywhere in the world, unless you're doing that, you're basically not going to get a foothold in any market in this current market, are you?
That's exactly right. And I think, it's important to point out, I mean, this single message, Brian's already said it, I'll say it again. It is totally correct that the Australian market, for example, and the US market are clearly different markets, and there's challenges with that. Any other country the same. But the fact that the technical problem that you're trying to solve, the specific security use case, is very likely to be very, very similar. And so having confidence that people that you have access to much more close to home can provide that feedback and give you traction and be design partners and be first customers, that's really critical. Take advantage of that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I haven't got my Q&A window on there, so Troy, I think there is one in there. If there is one question, if you wouldn't mind just popping that in there. I've lost my Q&A window. I've got my chat window, but not my Q&A. If there's one from the audience, because I think we've got sort of 2 minutes left with the gang here.
Yeah,
Jason,
just
I
pop
can
that
jump
in
in.
there.
Sorry.
Okay, yep. No, I've got one here. So just maybe early to tell, but how will the change in the US government impact the opportunities for Australian companies to break into the US? What have you seen on that front?
Brian, you want to start?
Yeah, I don't know. If we could predict what's happening tomorrow with our administration, that would be a miracle. But I think stepping back, our two countries have become closer, if not anything closer, over the last 5 years, right? With whether it's submarines or just general sharing here, and I don't anticipate that this will dramatically impact this sort of at the macro level. I think budgets are obviously under tremendous scrutiny, and so I don't think it's going to mean less opportunity. It's just going to mean things will shift from maybe one bucket to another, right? And so. But federal sales have always been long sales cycles and tricky, and I think that won't change, right? Fivecast is a great example. That's one of our companies. It sells a significant portion of its product into the U.S. federal government as well as the UK, and obviously quite a bit in Australia. And it's just meant that they have to really spend the time and they can't just sort of plow through the way they were doing it 2 years ago, right? Are we marketing to the right people with the right messages? All of it sort of has to be re-examined, but whether it's coming from Australia or homeborn in the US, I don't think is a disqualifier. I don't think that there's been any change in sort of now that things built in Australia are sort of on the outs. I think they're, anyone within the Five Eyes is still welcome, and I think has an opportunity to do significant business commercially, and even within the federal government. So.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think even from this side, just to sort of back that point up, is that it's not a political football here either. So I can't see that too much changes, and that cybersecurity is still going to be a key element to whatever happens going forward, no matter who's in charge of any country. So thank you so much to both of you for your time. We really appreciate you making the time for us and giving us insights there. And I'm sure if and when our companies are ready, they can get in contact with you through Global Vic and either through Troy or Daniel if suitable. But yeah, really appreciate it, and support through even what you've done with Casada and some other businesses has been a credit to you and the company. So we really do appreciate your time, and hopefully look forward to filling the books up with a few more Victorian companies in the coming months and years.
That'd be great. I gotta say, it's one of the favorite. We fight over who gets to attend the board meeting, so it's
there you go. I'm sure you do.
Yeah. So
we
hope to see some
it.
of you. Hope to see some of the folks in at RSA as well. Obviously, we'll be there in Black Hat and all of the sort of major events. If people are looking to find us personally, we're at all of those. So
perfect. We really look forward to it, and we appreciate your time for both of you. And yeah, please follow the guys, follow the company. 1011 Ventures, so much good stuff happening over there, and enjoy the balance of your day over there. And thanks again for your time.
Okay.
Thank you, guys.
Take care.
So now we get into another area, which is obviously key, and this is something that a lot of people get caught out on, and I think is critical. We focus so much on, we've touched on a capital requirement, but the legal and the regs that you'll find over in the US are completely different as well. From different jurisdictions and all those sorts of things. So when we're looking at these areas, we really need to start going and looking at what is it if you're a cybersecurity company landing in the US that you need to know. So we are very fortunate here to have both Claire Gibbs and Chris Kleiner to take us through here. So Claire is cyber data and privacy, and with Chris being special counsel from Cooley LLP, we're very, very lucky to have both of them on here. So if either of you jump in, please, Claire or Chris, and just tell us a bit about Cooley and the firm's work in cybersecurity in particular.
Sure. So thank you for having us. I'm Claire Gibbs. My colleague Chris Kleiner and I join you from the law firm Cooley. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the firm, but it was founded in Silicon Valley, and we have a very long history of working with early stage tech companies and VC, including in the cybersecurity industry. So one little stat I think is on our website is that more than I think over half of security industry IPOs since 2013 have involved Cooley. Most recently, we handled Rubrik's IPO. We're always working on venture financings. For example, like I think a couple months ago, we did Socket, a cybersecurity services firm. So some of the issues faced by cyber companies will, of course, be the same as for startups generally. Chris and I are both in Cooley's cyber data privacy practice, which means we assist all types of companies with compliance with privacy and cybersecurity regulations, cyber incident response, privacy and cyber-related litigation investigations, and corporate transactional work, including venture financing. So some of what we'll focus on in a minute is how to comply with with our patchwork of cyber and privacy laws in the US as a company providing services in the cybersecurity space. So I think that hopefully
that's good. No, I was
introduction.
going to say, I think, Claire, also, just with regard to foreign cybersecurity companies, especially from an Australian context, sort of coming into the US, what are some of the sort of key legal issues that companies might be likely to face when they enter the US market? What do you see as the main ones that most people are not aware of, or that they need to keep an eye on?
I'll hand it over to Chris.
Yeah, I can jump in.
Yeah.
Here, thanks, Claire. I think one of the common themes you're likely to hear from Claire and I over the next 10 to 15 minutes is really sort of a reflection of the patchwork of laws that companies face in the U.S. Right? I think it's a bit different than in many other jurisdictions. The vast majority of regulation on stateside is sort of at the state level, right? So if you're coming and doing work in the United States, you're really brought into an arena where you're going to be forced to contemplate and deal with, potentially 50 different state laws. You then also have sort of verticals across industries. So if you're going to be doing work within healthcare, you have to worry about the federal sort of healthcare regulations as well as state level healthcare regulations. And you've got that type of thing across financial industries, healthcare industries, defense and government contracting, right? I mean, so it's really sort of a matrixed approach to the various types of privacy laws and obligations, as well as security requirements that may apply depending on the industry that you're operating in. And I think that the complexity and sort of the number and volume of moving parts there really can be challenging. I think the other big difference specific to cybersecurity is sort of in terms of the frameworks, right? I think sort of speaking generally, right? I think globally ISO certifications are kind of, the gold standard and tend to be more frequent. There really isn't sort of a prevalent standard here in the US, right? We heard some of that mentioned at the outset of today's discussion, right? But certainly ISO carries weight here, but you've got things like the NIST frameworks. You've got similar, CIS security controls, FedRAMP, which relates to federal regulation, right? So there's, again, sort of across the board, you're dealing with quite a bit of sort of moving and varying obligations that may apply depending on the type of industry you're trying to serve.
Yeah, they're good points, and I think this is the thing where I find a lot of Australian companies, in particular, or Victorian companies, will trip up is even just setting up bank accounts over there, and the structure of the business, and where you locate yourself when you go over there. That there is, as you say, Chris, so many different tax implications, or and the banking situation in Australia. There really is only sort of 4 major banks, right? So the option there is different. And then if you are going to take money in from investors, how much time you need to spend there. Are you a resident? Do you go for a green card? There's so many things you've really got to think about. So and I think having this advice from you guys is golden, because it can actually take a lot of time and effort if you're not prepared for that before you go over there and not understanding that market. You can sort of go a long way backward before you can even start to move forward again if you don't take these things into account. So what sort of look when choosing an area to go to, I sort of, from my experience, and probably to sort of backfill it a little bit, is that you find if your solution is probably going to be more government based, you're probably better off being obviously somewhere like DC, or just on the East Coast or something like that. I think Australian companies often make the mistake, because they go to somewhere like RSA and they'll be in Silicon Valley or in that region. They think we should go there, but it's the cost of that as well, isn't it? The cost of living in those areas is quite high. So a place like Maryland might do some deals where you can get 2 staff there or something, or Texas are doing some things. So there's a lot of stuff to consider, isn't there? What would you sort of say is the sort of starting point for us to know, from your point of view, some real, just say top 3 things we should really consider before getting there?
Yeah, no, I think those are some great points, right? The geographical differences, cost of living in a place like New York or the Bay Area in California is astronomical compared to some more rural areas. And ironically enough, right, as you sort of point out, there's oftentimes, Austin, Texas is sort of a good example. There's really sort of a good tech hub in what probably globally people think about, cowboys and cattle, right, in Texas. Yep. But there really are opportunities, I think, really nationwide, and you would be well served to really kind of take a look at what types of companies are you looking to serve. I think there's certainly going to be sort of pros and cons. I think the prototypical one would be the Bay Area, right? As Claire mentioned at the introduction, Cooley started there. It's really a hub for a lot of tech-based firms, so it's certainly appealing in that regard. But the relative costs can be, potentially outweigh the benefits with something like that.
And also staffing laws are different as well, aren't they, Chris? Right. So even just picking up staff and often. Thing for Australian companies is, when going there, is they want to have founders there, right? So are you going to put some time in? And if you're going to have salespeople, they can be a bit more transient over there too, and they can be more commission based, and if there is a disagreement either way, they can leave a lot quicker. The employment laws are a lot different as well. So that, and again, jurisdictionally and just as a country in general, the employment situation over there is a lot different as well, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And it's sort of, again, not to belabor the point, right? But that's another example of where you see differences from state to state, right? In terms of like the patchwork type things. California is sort of notoriously sort of a very labor friendly state, right? There's going to be sort of differences in terms of how laws are interpreted and applied there. It's also tends to be more litigious, right? I think the US overall compared to Australia tends to be a lot more litigious, but even within the United States, a market like California tends to be much more friendly to plaintiffs firms, right? People that might be suing companies. And so, there's absolutely going to be additional risks that are sort of, not only part and parcel to operating the business, but really beyond the cybersecurity, right? The details, what the day-to-day work that you're doing become ancillary to some of these other considerations, the tax implications, the labor and employment, the litigation landscape, all of those things I think are very important considerations.
Yeah, and you also touched on the compliance part. So we've also looked at privacy issues are a bit different over in the US again, to here, and sort of probably, even though not directly involved, a lot of GDPR stuff does sort of flow over into the US as well, with the companies where you're spreading. So from a privacy point of view, that also does need to be taken in consideration, and contractually, as you say, are completely different, where you settle a dispute, whether it be with a customer or with someone working for you, is actually something that needs to be considered as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right.
Yeah. So, okay, if we're a cyber company, so we're coming to the US and they want to people want to engage with you, a lot of the questions that get asked over here are, can an Australian organisation maintain its operations here in Australia rather than having a US base? And then, sort of how would that work? And how have you seen that work? Does it work, or is it restrictive and you need to be having some sort of serious presence in the US?
Yeah, I think sort of both things can be true. And this really kind of comes back to what you're doing. I think generally the US laws, both on the privacy and security side, tend to be a bit more permissive than they are in other jurisdictions globally. So in the vast majority of industries, right, you won't have a data localization requirement to have, servers or operations set up in a particular jurisdiction, although there are exceptions to that, right? So, if you're going to be contracting in the defense space, if you're going to be contracting in the healthcare space, if you're going to be sort of serving those particular industries, the considerations are going to be different than sort of a general business type of implication. So, I think it's sort of, with the caveat that certain industries may vary that, it's absolutely possible to sort of maintain the base of operations out of Australia rather than setting up a sort of a major presence within the United States.
And that sort of dovetails into the other one as well is, and from your point of view, do you conduct IP, sort of patent trademark assessments as well? And that, again, is something to consider. Is that something that you take care of over there as well?
So Claire and I personally don't handle that, but Cooley is sort of a full service firm, right? So we absolutely have, folks that specialize in intellectual property rights, patent prosecution, as well as sort of research and assistance on that side. We've got, we sort of talked about it, the different industries that cybersecurity might implicate. We've got folks that specialize in healthcare regulatory. We've got sort of a dedicated practice group that talks about government contracting and sort of really facilitating those things. So Cooley itself absolutely has all of these resources. Claire and I aren't necessarily the experts, in all things here, but we certainly have
that's
access.
Good to know, that, because it is a key thing, right? And I don't think, again, we tend to be a little bit immature or sort of babe in the woods in some ways and not taking these sorts of things into account. So yeah, wasn't expecting you to more directly, but I think as a firm, these are all things you have to take into account, right? It can be, and are we checking these things before we enter into a new market? I think, these things are sort of key. We sort of get fixated so much on product and stuff like that, pick a name without doing enough research to make sure that it's not being used elsewhere, somewhere else in the world and stuff like that. So these are obviously considerations. So, well, from both your point of view, I wouldn't mind hearing from both of you on this one, but what would be the single probably most important piece of advice you'd give to cybersecurity companies entering into the US, from other countries? So, and Chris and Clarke, if you both want to have maybe different answers on that one, but from both your point of view, what do you see as, if you could just say this is the single most, or you can make it a two-parter if you like, but what do you see as the key things, or what trip people up mostly, and what do we need to look out for?
You want to take it first, Claire?
I can take it, and I might just be very practical about it, and from more of a cyber privacy lawyer lens. I think what we often help cyber startup clients with, first will be like really getting your contracts to a good place so that they your contracts and your public like privacy policy terms of service on your website. That's often like the first place we start. That of course requires that you understand your, you know, target market and customer base, as Chris was as Chris mentioned. But really, yeah, making sure your contract is written in a way that, you know, sufficiently protects your company, gives you the rights that you need in order to use data how you want, all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and do you see
Yeah.
anything, Claire, coming forward? Like, have you seen any changes that are marked? You know, just from machine learning or AI sort of coming into play and all those sorts of things. Have you seen, because there has been some changes from a political sphere here in Australia with regard to, you know, AI regulation and everything. We're sort of playing catch up a bit on that. Is there things we could be proactive on as well, sort of looking forward with those parts that you could see with your crystal ball as well?
I think so. The way this has come up for it, if we're talking about B2B service providers, I think the way that our current AI regulations may affect you, and specifically in terms of like how you process customer data, is they may just put limitations on like the extent to which you can use customer data to train your models, for example, that sort of thing. So yeah, you will want to, in the same way that you'll want to consider whether you're processing customer personal data and subject to a variety of privacy laws, you'll want to consider if you are using, you know, generative AI with your customer data, you'll want to consider if, you know, there are any of our new state AI laws that might apply to your operations.
Yep. Yeah, that's good. I think that's a good point. And Chris, anything from your side as well?
Yeah, I think I would sort of go back, Jason, to some of the stuff that you talked about is you know, on a broader scale, is really thinking through, you know, specialization and expertise in a particular area. You know, I think your example about RSA is exactly right. You sort of walk the floor of RSA and there's, you know, dozens or maybe hundreds of companies kind of doing the same things, right? And so I think you trying to break into the U.S. market can be particularly challenging if you're trying to do all things for all people, right? I think really kind of focusing in on a specialty area, finding out what it is that you do better, and then then you sort of layer in, what are the laws that we need to worry about here? Are there variances from state to state, right? I think all of those things will really help focus and help lead to success.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and that's something that I think it is such a big market, and you know, as you said, the whole of Australia is 27 million people, right? You know,
right.
You can get one state that has that, right, in the US. But this is the thing: you've got to pick a beachhead, and you've got to be specific, and you've almost got to niche down to get that to then spread. You know, that the mistake that I see a lot of companies, and not just from Australia, make is they go, "We're going to the US market." Yeah, you know, California a few years ago was the third biggest economy in the world, right? You know, so you got to sort of go, where are we picking actually where we're going to go? So I think that's great points, and obviously you guys give advice on that, and this advice has been golden, and I'm sure you'll send a bill through. We'll send it individually to each person listening on here. There has been 6 minute increments, yeah, so you'll be happy. But no, we really appreciate that. I've actually got a question here too, is also saying, can you recommend any resources for keeping up with the regulatory or legal environment in the US? Is there any resources where people can go and get even some basic information? I know it'll be a federally different to a state by state sort of basis, but anything you can recommend on that?
When it comes to privacy and security in particular, we can definitely recommend IAPP is the main, it's really international nonprofit. We, in addition to attending RSA, we always are, you can always find us at the annual IAPP conferences as well. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Yeah, that's good.
There's also Future of Privacy Forum is excellent and covers not just privacy, but things like AI as well.
Yep, no, that's good. So, and this is the thing, is that the more we can get prepared, and it makes everyone's job easier, right? So when dealing with you guys, you know, we know what we need to do and be prepared for, because, you know, sometimes I think people get to a certain point where they go, I think I'm ready, or they've got a customer And this part, if we don't have this part in place, it can actually delay a lot of things and you can miss out on sales. I've seen companies before, seriously, miss a sale just because they missed some of these points. They didn't have the bank account set up properly. There was something just not right in that whole chain of stuff. And if you don't have it, if you have a piece missing, it can cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars. I did see on an occasion from not having these things in place. So yeah, again, thank you so much to both Claire and Chris. I mean, this is phenomenal stuff and so useful and helpful for us to know. So we really appreciate your time. I know it's a bit later in the day over there for you, and we appreciate you hanging on and giving us all the information. And yeah, I'm sure at the right time we'll have people from this side of the world reach out and hopefully we can create some more successful businesses via using your services at Cooley. So thank you both again for being on. And I better wrap up. We're sort of coming 4 minutes to the top of the hour now. So yeah, I think for everyone on here, I hope there's been some great information. I know if I knew this information the first time I went to the US back in sort of 2017 with cyber, but it was also when we did Starwood Whiskey. Knowing to have a beachhead to go into the US would have saved us a lot of time and money. It is such a big market and so different in the way it runs in different parts there. The Cooley group also have some great free resources for startups as well. So if you can go to Cooley and you can get some resources from them, or just reach out and follow the gang on LinkedIn or wherever you can find them and go and get some free resources for startups, or reach out to Daniel or Troy here as well. Yeah, they're always happy to help out and get you on the right track. So yeah, I've gained a few insights myself. I hope everyone on the call's got something. As I said, this is the first of a 4-part series. So we've got another 3 to come after this. This session is recorded. But I'm just going to hand over to Troy just to wrap up now with 3 minutes to go.
Yeah, thank you, Jason, and good morning to all. My name is Troy Tui, and I'm a trade manager within the technology, health, and sport team at Global Victoria. I'd like to thank Jason and the Australian Cyber Network for moderating today's session, and to all of our speakers, both local and in the United States. I'll distribute the recording of today's session, and we'll also update it in our webinar series registration page on the Global Victoria website. As my colleague Daniel mentioned earlier in the session, and Jason just mentioned also, this was the first in a 4-part series. I encourage you to register for our next session on February 26, which focuses on the US defence sector. CISO will moderate that session, and we'll also have speakers from the Defence Counsel Victoria, LEADOS, and the executive team from Sanitas. Dan should have now placed the link in the webinar for the webinar registration page in the chat, and you can register for all the 3 remaining webinars via that link. This webinar series is not only the first deliverable in our US cybersecurity trade program, but a first step in what will be increased engagement from myself for our Victorian cybersecurity companies. I look forward to connecting with you all regarding your broader export plans. And Dan is available in our Washington, DC office, should you be ready to take that first step or increase your engagement in the US. To close, I hope this session has piqued your interest if you're thinking about exporting to the US, or it will encourage you to explore more opportunities if you've already started your journey. So enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Cheers, Troy. Thanks, mate. Bye.
Thank you.